45 pages. So cotton has a reputation. Hello and welcome back to another unhinged, unsupervised, really strange Ollie Knits deep dive. Today we're going to take a little look at cotton because, well, I've been knitting with it and also I've been digging around on the internet about it. And while I've honestly been having the time of my life, it turns out that cotton actually has quite the reputation. If you've spent any time on knitting forums or in real life knitting circles, you may have heard that it stretches, it grows, it has no memory. Same, honestly same. It's hard on your hands, and if you try and knit an entire sweater out of it, there's a very real chance it may attempt to turn into a dress. Well, at least that's what the internet will have us believe. But this is the awkward part, because I've been knitting with cotton a lot lately, and I've been having a great time. My garments fit, my stitches look neat, everything's going swimmingly. Nothing has turned into a dress unintentionally. So I found myself wondering, has cotton developed a bit of an unfair reputation? Everybody has a story. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody seems absolutely convinced that they're right. Me too. I also think I'm right. So naturally, I did what any reasonable fibre nerd would do. I fell down a research rabbit hole, and I found that cotton's story is far more interesting than I expected it to be, because it's not just a yarn, it's a plant, it's a global commodity, and it is a fibre that has shaped the economy for a very long time. It's a material that's clothed emperors, revolutionaries, laborers, and probably at least one person who's insisted on knitting a full-length cable cardigan despite all the warnings. So today we're going to untangle cotton's reputation. We're going to talk about why knitters complain about it, why other knitters absolutely adore it, whether it really deserves the criticism it gets. Put on your kettle, grab your knitting, and let's go meet one of the most misunderstood fibres in the yarn store. Chapter 1, the facts. So let's begin with one of the most commonly asked questions. Is cotton yarn good for beginners? The internet is going to say no. It's going to tell you that cotton has no stretch. It's going to tell you that it causes hand fatigue, and it will bring up how much it splits, which is true. It will tell you that it may make your first knitting project as difficult as possible. In fact, if you spend enough time on knitting forums, you could get the impression that handing a beginner a ball of cotton is the equivalent of handing them a violin and just wishing them good luck. And there is some truth buried in there. Cotton definitely doesn't have the same elasticity as wool. It's not going to bounce back quite the same way. While I was doing my research, I kept running into people talking about cotton like it was one type of thing, as though every cotton yarn is going to behave exactly the same way. That's kind of like saying all dogs are the same. The cotton that I've been knitting with has been a real dream. What a pleasure to knit with. So either I've been extraordinarily lucky, or perhaps cotton's reputation isn't telling the whole story. Because as we'll discover a little later on, not all cotton yarns are created equally. The next question I found was, does cotton shrink? And this time, the internet responded with an enthusiastic yes. Hot water, tumble dryers, accidental laundry disasters. Every knitter seems to know someone who has accidentally turned their cotton garment into something that will now fit their toddler. And to be fair, cotton absolutely can shrink. Unlike wool, which tends to have its own dramatic relationship with heat and agitation, cotton fibers can contract when exposed to heat, which is why you'll often see advice like swatch and wash before you even think of casting on. And that's really good advice, by the way. However, as I kept digging, I did notice something interesting. People often talk about shrinkage like it's a one-way journey. Like, the garment shrank, the story's over. But cotton's actually a little more complicated than that, because it can stretch, and honestly, sometimes quite dramatically. In fact, if you've ever owned a pair of jeans, you probably already know this. Fresh out the wash, it's got you feeling like you've had too many snacks over the weekend. A few wears later, and you feel like a skinny girl again. Cotton fabrics are constantly negotiating with gravity, moisture, movement, and the way that we use them. So, more than thinking of it as a fiber that simply shrinks, it's better to think of it as a fiber that moves, which is going to bring us back to the humble swatch. Swatches are not just there to tell you whether your stitch matches the pattern. It's there to show you who the yarn really is, how it behaves, washes, dries, how much it relaxes, rebounds. Because when you understand all that, most of cotton's so-called surprises aren't really that surprising at all. The next common question that came up is, why is my cotton garment sagging? And once again, the internet had a very confident answer on this one. Because cotton's heavy! And that is true. Cotton generally is heavier than wool. Add a little gravity, add a little water, add a very long garment, and eventually physics enters the chat. But personally, I think this is where cotton just gets blamed for being cotton. Because every fiber has a thing it excels at. Every fiber has a thing it would rather not be doing. And I don't think that makes cotton a bad fiber. It just means we need to understand what we're working with. The real question isn't, does cotton sag? The real question is, what does cotton want to be? And the answer is usually t-shirts, tank tops, lightweight cardigans, relaxed silhouette garments. Projects that can take advantage of cotton's beautiful drape without asking it to carry the weight of 1,000 worlds. The same principle applies to stitch patterns. Stockinette, absolutely yes. Simple textures, perfect stability. Seams, add structure. And here's a little trick. If you're worried about too much growth, go for a slightly tighter gauge or a smaller needle. It can honestly make a surprising difference. Even the yarn construction matters. A tightly spun cotton will behave very differently to a loosely spun one. A cotton blend will behave differently to a pure cotton. Have you worked with cotton linen before? At this point, you may see a theme emerging. Cotton isn't difficult, cotton's specific. I get it, girl. It has specific strengths and limitations. And the more you understand those, the easier it is to choose projects that allow the cotton to do what it does best. Because the goal isn't to make every yarn fit into every cookie cutter pattern. The goal is to match the right fiber to the right project. And when that happens, cotton can be absolutely wonderful. The next very common question was, what is mercerized cotton? This is one of those terms that sounds way more intimidating than it actually is. The first time I heard it, I thought it was either a type of yarn, maybe a region, perhaps a specific species of cotton. Turns out it's none of those. Mercerized cotton is just cotton that has been chemically treated after it has been spun. And the reason people do it is surprisingly simple. Basically, someone looked at cotton and thought, what if we make it shiny? And then they chemically treated it and it changed the structure of the fiber itself. It also became stronger. It absorbed dye more readily. Colors appeared more vibrant and rich. And obviously, it developed a subtle sheen. If you've ever been in a yarn store and picked up a ball, cake, skein of cotton and looked at it and thought, this is quite shiny, there's a very good chance it was mercerized. It also helps reduce shrinkage, although as we have discovered and we'll get into, cotton's relationship with washing is not that simple. And if you're wondering how this magical transformation happens, the short answer involves chemistry. The slightly longer answer involves treating the cotton with a chemical known as sodium hydroxide, which completely alters the fiber's structure and changes the way it behaves. And while that does sound kind of dramatic, the end result really is just a cotton yarn with different personality traits. She's now a little stronger, a little shinier, a little more of a show-off. It's also worth mentioning that mercerization and fiber quality are not the same thing. You can have mercerized cotton from different grades of fiber. And this is where we're going to start to run into names like Prima cotton, Egyptian cotton. These types of cottons are prized for their long fibers, also known as staple lengths. Longer fibers generally create smoother, more stable yarns. So when knitters are talking about a good yarn, they're probably also using a yarn that has a very long staple length. Moreover, talking about any particular kind of treatment, which really brings us back to a running theme throughout this entire video, and that is cotton isn't just one thing. There are actually a lot of different plant variations, and there are a lot of different ways to manufacture them. And the price that you're going in, and mind you, it isn't always that expensive, but the cheaper you go in, the less performative that cotton is going to be. Chapter 2, but actually, cotton is just misunderstood. So far, we've spent quite a lot of time discussing cotton's reputation, the complaints, the warnings, the cautionary tales passed down from one knitter to another like stories over a campfire. We've heard it stretches, it shrinks, it sags. We've heard it can make perfectly sensible knitters question all of their life choices. But despite all of those complaints, and there are a few, cotton remains one of the most widely used fibers in the entire world. And that didn't just happen by accident. Because underneath it all, cotton truly is very remarkable. In fact, the more I researched this fiber, the more I started asking completely different questions. What if cotton isn't difficult at all? What if cotton's just misunderstood? In order to understand why cotton behaves the way it does, we need to zoom in, and I mean all the way in, far beyond the balls and far beyond the stitches, all the way down to the fiber itself. So it's a plant fiber. We already knew that. I mean, I'm not shocking anyone, right? But what shocked me was just how much of cotton is made from one particular fiber. And we're talking about cellulose. A mature cotton fiber is almost exclusively cellulose. Depending on the fiber, it can range anywhere from 88% to 96%. That's a lot. It's remarkably pure, and it's part of the reasons why cotton is so incredibly strong. But it just got more fascinating because cotton isn't built from tiny little cells developing in little segments like most everything else is. With cotton, each cell starts as one elongated strand, and it just keeps stretching as it grows. It's one cell, one continuous structure that you're looking at per strand. That means it's got no joints and no weak points, and that's what's giving it its exceptional strength. It's basically one extremely ambitious little plant cell that woke up one day and said, you know what? I want to be a t-shirt. And somehow, against all odds, it succeeded. And this quality gives it not just strength, not just durability, but it also means that that fiber can bend really easily. You can twist it, you can stretch it. It can survive repeated washing. And it can generally survive a surprising amount of abuse throughout its entire life. All because what looks like a tiny little ball of cotton is actually one of nature's most astonishing engineering feats. And we've only just started digging at the bioengineering part. It gets more interesting, because honestly, if Cotton's story ended there, that would be impressive. But nature wasn't finished showing off, because under the microscope, cotton doesn't look like the beautiful smooth fiber it looks like in the ball. In fact, it's very crumpled and very twisted. It kind of looks like it's been left in the tumble dryer too long. Whilst cotton is alive on the plant, it contains a hollow fiber known as lumen. You could think of it like a tiny tube, almost like a straw, that's running throughout the entire center of the fiber. But as that strand matures and dries, the lumen begins to collapse down in on itself. And that collapsing forces the fiber to twist and contort. And I'm not talking about like a little bit here and there. I'm talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of times. It kind of almost looks like a flattened ribbon that's just been like smushed out. And at first you may look at it and think, this can't be right. It is so smooth. But it is one of those moments where nature says to you, girl, I know what I'm doing. Because those tiny twists create texture. And the texture creates friction, and then the friction helps the neighboring fibers hold on to one another. Without those microscopic twists, spinning cotton would be a nightmare. The fibers would just slide apart. But instead, all of these millions of little ribbons are catching onto one another, and they're holding each other together. Which means that cotton is strong enough to not only make garments, it can be bedding, sails, workwear, and just about anything in between. All thanks to that hollow structure, and all thanks to that crimping. Now, strength alone doesn't just explain why humans fell so deeply in love with cotton. After all, there are plenty of strong fibers in this world. What actually made cotton special was its comfort. And the reason for this lies once again in that cellulose, that hollow fiber structure. Because cellulose has a rather interesting relationship with water. The molecules are covered with tiny chemical structures known as hydroxyl groups. That does sound terribly scientific, but for our purposes, you can think of it as tiny little magnets. Just instead of for metal, for water. Whenever the moisture appears, these little molecules are ready and waiting. And they can hold an astonishing amount of water before the garment even really feels wet. And this is kind of why cotton is such a perfect summer fabric, because this relationship to water also is its relationship to why the fabric itself feels so cooling. Unlike wool, cotton isn't trying to keep you warm. Wool fibers are naturally crimped. They curl and bend, and they create tiny, countless little pockets of air. And trapped air is one of nature's best insulators. It's why sheep can walk around wearing what looks like a full knitted duvet and still be fine. Cotton goes in the exact opposite direction. It doesn't trap warm air the same way. Instead, it allows air to move freely through it. Heat escapes, the air is circulating, the skin can breathe. It's less like wearing a blanket and more like wearing an open window, which is why when the weather starts warming up, which it's been doing a lot lately, many knitters start finding themselves reaching for or researching cotton, linen, and other plant-based blends. And after spending a couple of summers in the Netherlands and feeling like I'm being slowly poached, I can see the appeal. So, if learning that cotton can absorb an enormous amount of water wasn't strange enough, things are about to get stranger. Because most fibers have a fairly predictable reaction to getting wet. Usually they become more vulnerable and a little more delicate. They're now more likely to stretch, weaken, and just generally misbehave, which is reasonable. I mean, you can say that of most things. Usually water doesn't improve the situation. And yet somehow cotton missed that meeting, because cotton gets stronger when it's wet. When water enters the situation, it helps the internal structures redistribute and shift the tension rather than simply snapping under stress. Instead of getting fragile, it actually gains strength. Not an enormous amount, but enough for textile scientists to go, I could measure that, which is one of cotton's most famous characteristics. Its ability to survive countless washes. The very thing that weakens most materials, cotton handles surprisingly well. While other fibers are asking you to check the label and handle them with care, cotton's already halfway through your spin cycle wondering what all the fuss is about. It also handles alkaline situations very well, which is useful because most of our cleaning products have a high alkalinity. And this, I think, is one of the reasons it's got such a relevance all throughout human history, because comfort is nice. Softness, lovely, but durability, that changes civilizations. A fiber that can be worn, washed, scrubbed, and worn again without blinking an eye, this is something that's going to be carried throughout generations. I mean, especially before the luxury of washing machines and being able to own 27 black t-shirts. Identical. Chapter 3, From Plant to Skein, How Cotton Yarn is Made. So now all of this fascinating science has run into a practical problem. And that problem is we don't just go picking already made cakes, balls, skeins of yarn. It's got to be processed. I know, shocking revelation. At no point has a knitter ever successfully walked into a cotton field, picked up a ball of cotton, attached it to her needles, and produced a cardigan. There were a few steps in between, quite a few actually. The journey starts in the cotton fields, where the tiny balls of cotton are harvested. They are harvested from the mature cotton pods. From the seeds, they're pulled out, plucked out in fluffy balls. Once collected, they are then cleaned and dried before moving into one of the most important processes in cotton manufacturing, ginning. And no, I'm not talking about, can I have a tonic please? Ginning separates the valuable cotton fibers from the raw seed material, producing what is known as cotton lint. But at this point, it is still a chaotic mess, just a little more useful. The next process brings a little bit more order to the situation. The fibers now open, they are mixed, and they are fed through ginormous carding machines. These machines comb through the tangled cotton and gradually encourage the fibers to align in the same direction. It's like brushing thousands of stubborn hairs all together at once. And it then produces something called a sliver, a thick, strong rope of loosely aligned fibers. For higher quality cotton fibers, the sliver may then go through additional combing. This will basically just remove all the shorter fibers and comb the longer ones together. If you've ever felt cotton, you may notice that it is exceptionally soft, almost softer than wool. And this is actually why. The fibers are then drawn out, thinned, and gently twisted, and this is known as roving. You can kind of think of roving as a yarn's awkward teenage phase. It's no longer a fluffy cloud, but it's not quite yarn yet either. The final transformation happens during the spinning phase. The fibers are stretched, twisted, and strengthened until they eventually become a continuous strand of yarn. A process that humans have been performing in one form or another for a long time. And from there, the yarn will be plied, which is twisting it together in multiple strands, or just one strand. That can happen too. It could be dyed, and now it could be mercerized. But eventually, after all the cleaning, combing, aligning, twisting, winding, and general textile wizardry, it now arrives to us as a ball or a cake or a skein ready to cast on, or just go into your stash.